Rain turned the city into a smear of light. On the river, neon smeared like watercolor. Traffic crawled under sodium lamps. Umbrellas bobbed like black beetles along the embankment. In a glass-fronted townhouse off Kensington, a dinner party was winding down. Crystal glasses chimed. Laughter had the brittle edge of people who had spoken secrets for years. And on the mantel, a small watercolor of a Black Lotus sat in a gilt frame. A joke, someone had said, at the host's fondness for oblique symbols. It was not a joke. When the lights went out, the crowd thought first of a fuse. They laughed. Someone joked about the city's aging grid. Then, in one motion that was too precise, too practiced, every lamp in the room seemed to die, plunging the chamber into an instant that stretched like a held breath. There was a sound, a sharp, surgical whisper. Then, a body hit the parquet with the muffled thud of cloth on floor. The foreign minister of a small but influential state. Bond rose from the chair, as if he had been standing. His suit was still dark from the previous evening. His tie was an exact line. "Assassination at a dinner party is efficient," he said. "Public, quick, impossible to claim. Who was there?" "People with influence," M answered. "Oil interests, defense contractors. The man who died was attempting to broker an intelligence-sharing initiative. We have reason to believe what killed him was meant to be symbolic, less an operation than an announcement. The attackers left a single emblem." She slid a photograph across the desk. A small Black Lotus embroidered on a sleeve. "Black Lotus," Bond murmured, tasting the syllables. The name was elegance and poison, an underground syndicate, whisper network, and myth in equal measure. Rumors wandered through the files. Assassins trained in a dozen martial disciplines, a code of silence so strict its members wore it like armor. Some called them ghosts, others called them a religion with blood as scripture. M's eyes held his. "It's real." She did. She always had names. They met at a place Bond trusted because the coffee was reliably indifferent and the chairs were forgiving. Q came late by design. If he arrived early, he looked like he'd slept poorly and been up all night, which he almost always had. But this morning he loomed in as the one person in the group who kept a smile for the absurd. Bond introduced the others with the casualness of a man naming chess pieces. "Naomi Clark," he said, "close combat specialist, Krav Maga and Judo, quick with a joint lock and quicker with a headbutt." Naomi looked him over, thumb drumming a rhythm on her cup. She had shoulders like a prize fighter and the stare of someone who'd learned to let the world know she was not to be trifled with. "Marcus Hale," Tanner added, ex-SAS tech and terrain guy. He can make a dead battery do honest work and is criminally good at getting into places that would prefer he didn't. "Dr. Elias Ross," Bond said, and Elias smiled, a compact man who read data the way Bond read rooms. From the photographs and the security feeds, they traced a pattern. A courier using a courier's anonymity as a shield, moving through a dozen low-level jobs to look like a life. The name on one receipt, the brand of an off-the-shelf watch, a hair caught on a sleeve. These were not nuggets, they were the breadcrumbs. Elias fed data to the team in a way that made the wrong comfortable things stand out like bruises on skin. "The thread runs to a storage cluster in East London," Elias said, tapping a touchpad. "Unit 409 was accessed twice in the last month by someone using stolen IDs. Cross-reference with CCTV, we get a silhouette. Male, late 30s, athletic. Tattoo in left forearm. The pattern matches an existing file. Runs with a known courier network. Likely moves through Istanbul on his schedule. Then we go to Istanbul, Bond said. He turned to Naomi. You and Aisha take the perimeter. Marcus, you and I handle ingress. Elias and Tanner will run comms and patch and queue on demand. Naomi's lip twitched. Sounds fun. They left 2 hours later. Marcus moved like a man who had reached into engines since he was a child. He squeezed into the control board and bypassed the panel. He did not lecture. He made things happen. The door thudded open, and the storage bay revealed a small, tidy den. A mattress rolled up to the side, a stack of shipping crates, a map board with pins, and the scent of someone who had been living on coffee and fast food for weeks. A jacket on a peg had a tell, a small smudge of engine grease in the pocket. Bond's hand brushed the crest on a cheap lighter and paused. He closed the door gently behind them. It was all too neat to be random. They split the room in rehearsed silence. Naomi peeled the mattress roll back and found a flash drive taped to the frame. Elias's breath made a small sound of triumph. Money flows right here, Elias said. And watch this. There's a coded manifest. We might be looking at a schedule. Istanbul to the Bosphorus, then a container ship out in 2 weeks. They moved faster, folding into crowd flows until Bond lost the outline of his own shadow. They followed him for 2 days in shifts. At night, Bond and Marcus. During the day, Naomi and Aisha. The courier had a rhythm. He bought fried fish from the market at the same stall on Fridays. He drank at a bar in Galata where the bartender only ever filled his glass on the second nod. He visited a tiny barber whose hand was steady enough to cut guilt out. The man was careful. He moved like a man with practice. On the third night, the thread broke in the manner Bond expected it to. Small, almost insignificant, in a way that tells you someone wants you to look the other way. The courier returned to a narrow lane that ended in a service yard. Bond smelled the metallic sweetness of the sea and then a sharp countercurrent. Petrol and machine oil. The man pushed through a gate that should have been locked. He thought himself alone. Bond did not wait long. Bond moved with practiced kindness. He carried him to the Aston, seatbelted him like a small boy, and drove to the safe house with the radio off and the rain on the windshield like a metronome. The man's breaths came shallow and uneven, the rhythm of someone waking from sleep and not knowing the world. Bond did not ask the team to close the curtains. Intelligence wants light, not theater. At the safe house, the team worked as a unit. Naomi bound hands and legs. Marcus checked for trackers that might turn a confession into a trap. Elias set up the recorder. Bond leaned over the man and said, simply, "We're going to talk." He did not describe what would be done. He did not explain the device he had used to ensure the man remained drowsed during transit, only that he had rendered him lightly unconscious for transport and that they would bring him back to lucidity for speaking. This is the novel's language, clinical, indefinite, not instructive. When the courier's eyes opened, there was anger. Bond did not smile. He fed back fragments, the truth leavened with facts, until the man's resistance collapsed into a kind of mechanized confession. When the man finally yielded, he did so like someone who had chosen the less painful path, the same way soldiers on both sides have chosen survival over loyalty for generations. Bond recorded every syllable. He sat back and let exhaustion slide across him like a cloak. Outside, dawn was thinning the rain. Inside, the team arranged themselves. Bond dialed Tanner and, through him, M. The operation that would come, an early surgical strike on the textile hanger, would be planned with the kind of precision that left little room for improvisation. If Black Lotus had a seed there, they would uproot it. Bond took a breath and, for a rare second, let the idea of home flicker through his mind. Something small, ordinary. The lane outside the safe house smelled of frying oil and wet stone. He stubbed out his cigarette and told the team, simply, "We move at dusk." Unknown signature. Could be a person, could be equipment. Bond shifted, tasting cold coffee and the adrenaline that lives in waiting. On his knees in the van, Marcus checked his rig. Locks, cutting shears, a small grappling line for the mezzanine, the kind of kit you use when you intend to be out before the sun notices you've ever been there. Naomi ran through hand signals. Aisha adjusted her gloves and shadowed Bond's shoulder with the fierce, quiet smile of a fighter ready to test angles. M had not wanted a spectacle. The team would move like a surgeon's hand. No collateral, no fireworks. Bond had insisted, quietly, on one old habit. He would enter last, so he could see the results of the others' work and make an immediate choice if things went austere. "Rule check," Bond whispered. "Silent ingress, non-lethal first. Recover tech, recover manifest. Exit 40 minutes. No heroics." Naomi grinned without humor. "We do non-lethal like others do breakfast." They advanced at dusk. An unexpected noise, a clink of metal, sent 3 heads turning at once from the far partition. Men in work coveralls. Not heavy security, but armed and ready with the kind of men who work docks at night and will kill to keep a living. Naomi was the first into movement. A palm heel strike, rooted stance, Krav Maga close in, where she stepped in at a 70-degree angle, redirecting a raised arm and snapping the man's elbow with the practiced twist. The impact was small but decisive. The man folded. Aisha's foot carved air in a beautiful arc. Salat's crescent heel kick, contacting a second man's rib cage with the soft cloth of the shoe, and the attacker bent like a wilting reed. Marcus moved like an engineered shadow. He dropped a line to the mezzanine, climbed with a practiced speed that left no sound. Bond closed on the cluster of thermal heat like a hunter. 2 men stepped from behind a crate and fired a single flash of white light. Stun grenades, rolling like pebbles. Instinct tightened in Bond like a wire. He landed, rolled, and slammed a forearm into the knife hand. The blade clattered away like a glasses case. Bond's knee hit the man's thigh in a knee smash that's surgical in pain, and then he pinned the attacker's shoulder blades, securing him. The team moved with that kinetic certainty born of trust. There was artistry in how they accomplished violence, choreographing the chaos into useful form. An old, profane thing, perhaps, to find beauty in survival, but Bond had seen wars and knew the difference. They reached the cluster Elias had flagged. The thermal shadow was a machine, a crate wide, humming faintly. Metal edges, vents, an industrial drone the size of a child's coffin. Around it lay a collection of drives, their casings stamped with the symbol Bond had seen whispered in the dossier. A Black Lotus in negative, the petals like knives. Elias came in, breathless with information. "Prototype," he said. "Autonomous targeting. AI-assisted. Tests in a confined environment show the ability to track individuals based on gait analysis. It's..." Footfalls came, the clunk and stomp of trained soldiers in tactical gear. They expected a perimeter sweep. What arrived instead was precise and unusual. a unit of fighters who moved with a discipline that smelled like training in more than one tradition. They flowed like water against stone. They used short-staff weapons and folding blades that sparkled with practiced lethality. Black Lotus, Bond thought, had not left this operation in local hands. This was professional. The first two came through in a simple feint. One man pushed forward, attracting attention. Another broke to the left with a spinning back kick. Naomi met the kick with a countersweep, dropping the attacker and reversing momentum into a wrist lock. Her thighs slammed into his chest as she forced him down. Senkaku Osai, a triangle pin done standing. Aisha, compact and dangerous, used a double-hand block to catch a staff strike. She spun, drawing the staff across her arms in a disarming slip and catch that left the weapon cracking against the floor. Marcus used the narrow cord, and Bond felt the cold truer than the temperature. "Mr. Bond," the man said, voice velvety, "we are flattered you would come for our little experiment." Bond's jaw tightened. "Who are you?" he asked. "A name is a convenience, James. Call me Hiroshi Kage." His voice held that inevitable authority Bond had read of in dossiers. Kage, the Shadow Master, nodded as though to a question Bond had not asked. But tonight is not the time for introductions. He lifted a hand. The men behind him surged. What followed was not a battle so much as a storm. The hangar was compressed into a dozen small fights, pockets of choreography where one movement opened or closed a life. Naomi faced a pair of blades and used a catch and funnel, trapping one blade, using the defender's momentum to throw him like a rag. Aisha moved through the warehouse with cat-like economy, a devastating crescent at the throat, turning a man's light into a soft croak. Bond tangled with a man, a staccato of choking pressure that made eyes water and lungs seize. For a heartbeat no one could see. In that second, a shadow moved. Kage's figure, precise and almost lyrical, closing distance. He brandished no weapon. His hands were empty, but his intent was carved into the night. Bond met him. Two men, and then the rest blurred into a battle of blades and breath. He felt the swords whisper and answered with bare hands, his palm to Kage's chest, an attempt to upset balance. Kage stepped aside like a reed, and his knee rose in a Muay Thai clinch that clasped Bond's thigh. Bond spun, inverted, and drove Kage down in a twisting, ugly throw, a move that used hips, timing, and the fulcrum of the man's own center. They hit hard. The impact flattened sound. For a sliver of time, Bond's world narrowed to the breath in his own throat and the man he had before him. Kage's scarf had fallen away in the tumble. For an instant, Bond saw a face younger than the dossier suggested, soles with hard edges. Outside, as they loaded the evidence, Bond watched the water like a dark mirror. Elias brushed his fingers across the box containing the drives as if they might sing. "This AI," Elias murmured, "it's not just targeting. It learns. Gait, voice print, micro gestures. If they perfect this, they don't need an army. They can unmake crowds one by one." Bond felt the weight of the word. "So we stop them," he said flatly. "Take the tech, follow the manifest, find Cog." Not just Cog. Naomi's face was severe in the flare of the van lights. "There's a name on the manifest. A financier, Adrian Vale. He's not in the streets, he's in the boardrooms." Bond nodded, the plan sharpening like a blade. They'd taken the immediate prize, evidence, routes, a prototype, but the center had moved. Black Lotus had teeth in both muscle and ledger. A man like Vale could move gods with an email. Elias packed the drives away. "We got enough We follow the money, and it will take us to the architect. And when the architect is revealed, we cut the head." M's voice came through the earpiece then, distant and precise. "And when you cut the head, 007, make certain you're not holding the knife that keeps the rot alive." Bond listened, the world narrowing to the hum of the van and the slow rhythm of headlights on wet tarmac. The Black Lotus had bloomed. The chase had only just begun. The invitation was glossy, heavy paper weighted with imported starch. Adrian Vale's name sat on it in embossed gilt, his company logo, an abstracted Ouroboros, subtle as a brand and just as hungry. Vale entertained like a man investing in immortality, art that increased, wine that multiplied his guests' appetites for acquisition, and a guest list that read like a ledger of influence. Ministers, CEOs, a bishop or two, just to lend moral ambiguity a thin veneer. Bond studied the invite aboard the quiet flight back to London. Q had given him a tuxedo lined with more than silk. Bond walked in as Charles Beaumont, investor, donor, tasteful patron of things obscure. He moved like water over marble, smiling the mechanical half-smile that greased conversations. Naomi and Aisha shadowed the periphery, eyes calculating the crowd and the routes that moved between them. Service corridors, a basement vault, an atrium that could host an orchestra and a conspiracy in equal measure. Marcus, device tucked into a service belt, slipped in behind catering staff, a ghost wearing a tray. Elias sat at the periphery, his fingers on a tablet, eyes not on the quartet, but on the soft blue cascade of feeds. Vale's interior cams, traffic at the gates, chatter on secure lines. Tanner was a presence in the boss logistics, coordinating police reluctance if needed, ensuring diplomatic friction stayed lubricated. They watched Vale, who shook hands like a man sealing contracts with the warmth of a practiced hand. He had the look of someone who repays kindness with influence. Bond let his fingers brush over the case and tapped twice. The watch gave a quiet chirp. The lock across the corridor blinked a neutral green for 8 heartbeats. That was all the invitation they had. They moved like a single organism. Marcus and Naomi took the stair into the service corridors, Naomi's hand at Marcus's elbow, an unspoken rhythm. Bond followed a beat behind, his tux jacket brushing a lamp. The basement's cool air smelled of stone and vault oil. Vale's security was a cathedral of protocols, retinal scanners, infrared grids, a voice print lock for the door into the inner vault. They had minutes, they had cue, they had practice. Elias's tablet painted the sequence in numbers. Retinal lock cycles every 22 seconds. There's a blind spot at 21. We have a window. Do you want a smoke screen, Q? No fireworks, came Q's velvet reply over Bond's ear. A whisper will do. Another click on Bond's wrist, and a measured pulse of interference flickered the voice print sensor to sleep for 17 seconds. Just enough. The vault doors sighed open. He had a comfortable face and a history of being in the right place when money moved. An enabler. A boy with clean hands in an unclean business. Bond flagged the data. Got it, Elias said. We lift, we go. They lifted with mechanical caution. Bond felt the sudden tightness of being the man who moved evidence. As they retraced their steps, Marcus pressed his shoulder against an old service door. From the other side, the whisper of purpose hardened into a sound. Boots, slow applause. The ballroom above continued in a oblivious rhythm. Bond felt the constant irony. Music plays while men plan the world. The fight downstairs was a sequence of panels, like frames of a film, and each burst of motion had both purpose and choreography. These security men were not mere hired hands. They were trained, close-quarter fighters schooled in modern combatives. Their leader moved with the measured grace Bond had seen in Cage's men, no surprise. Engineering voice humming with practical joy. Bond reached the stairwell as a man lunged with a short blade. He parried and executed a snap kick, not a dramatic arc, but a measured push to the knee that disabled the limb's support. The man went down with a surprised little noise that was burnt out by the sound of Bond's reply, a flat-knuckled strike to the jaw, quick as a metronome. They moved up the corridor like a single storm. The door to the main vault opened onto chaos. A line of Vale's men poured in like the black tide. It might have been a brutal brawl, but Bond's team worked with economy. Naomi seized a guard's wrist and looped him with a reversed armbar, twisting to disarm. Aisha trapped a boot and executed a rolling hip throw that sent a man careening into a stack of crates. Marcus, muscles and engineering, applied joint compressions with the solidity of a man who has borne great weights. Bond found Rourke at the far side, Possum Sweet, the man in the clean suit. The call came months later, as if rehearsed by fate, Tanner's voice low. "We've had a leak in comms. Somebody tipped Vale off." He let the sentence hang like a blade. "We traced the breach. Rourke is not Vale's man. Rourke is—" The pause was more telling than a shout. "A conduit. He's been in contact with someone on our side." Bond's head snapped toward Elias. "Is that you?" Elias's face was a private map of guilt and shock. "No," he said honestly. "My logs show no outgoing pings. My terminals were clean." Naomi's laugh was bitter. Then who? Bond thought of the clean hands, the clean smile. Trust, like glass, revealed its crack when held to the light. They ran the trace again. This time, the pattern became hairline and then a screen. A feed of packets bounced in a loop with surgical precision, the signature of someone who knew the system as well as MI6. The trail came back not to Elias's account, not to Marcus's, but to a secure branch terminal used by Tanner himself in. The team sat in silence, the car's engine a small, constant hum. The betrayal stung colder than any physical wound. For Bond, it was worse. The idea that someone in the org he trusted might be the key that Black Lotus used to turn doors into corridors of death. They had the drives. They had a lead. They had a puncture in the hull. The hunt would go on, with a new, personal edge. Trust, they all knew, makes excellent prey. The safe house sat off Lambeth, a narrow brick townhouse stitched into the row like a patient scar. It had been retrofitted for quiet work, blackout curtains, reinforced locks, cameras that looped false images to anyone watching, a false calm for men and women who lived with knives in their shadows. Rourke sat bound to a chair in the basement, his wrists cinched with steel cuffs that bit into the skin. His suit jacket lay discarded in the corner. The name hung in the basement like frost. Rourke's smile faltered. Bond stepped forward, slow. He crouched until his face was level with Rourke's. His eyes did not blink. "Black Lotus," he repeated. "The cell Vale protects. Who gives the orders? Who funds them? If you don't answer, I'll leave you in Naomi's company. She doesn't enjoy wasting time." Rourke's throat shifted. He tried for composure, but the basement was intimate, and predators smell fear as readily as they see it. Naomi stopped pacing and crouched by his ear. Her voice was a blade's whisper. Do you know how many nerves are in the wrist? Cut one the wrong way, you lose the use of your hand. Not life-threatening, but permanently inconvenient. You wouldn't be able to sign your checks. Imagine that. Work swallowed. His eyes flickered between Bond and Naomi. You don't understand, he said. It's bigger than Vale, bigger than your service. If I talk, I'm dead. Bond's voice hardened. If you don't talk, you'll wish you were. The silence stretched until Rourke's breath came fast, shallow. He broke, as men do when faced with inevitability. A sleek vessel, black-hulled, luxurious, its path cutting through the sea like a knife through velvet. Confirmed, Elias said. The Erebus filed a course for international waters. No port of call listed. Classic offshore deniability. Bond's jaw set. Then that's where we go. 3 nights later, the Mediterranean breathes calm under a silver moon. The Erebus floated on the water like an obsidian palace, its decks lit with subtle gold, its silhouette predatory against the horizon. Music drifted faintly from the upper deck. Jazz, smooth and languid, as if nothing in the world could be sharper than a saxophone's sigh. But Bond knew better. Vale was hosting, and where Vale entertained, deals were made in shadows darker than the sea. MI6 had provided insertion via a disguised fishing trawler. Bond, Naomi, Aisha, Marcus, and Elias moved into a rigid-hulled inflatable, black as the night. Their wetsuits hugged close, each man and woman carrying compact gear. Suppressed weapons, combat knives, climbing rigs, and comm units humming with encrypted chatter. Likely originals acquired through channels Vale specialized in. Crystal decanters glowed with amber fire. It was a palace built for men who fed on the world and left bones behind. They moved through corridors with silent efficiency, splitting into pairs. Bond and Naomi advanced toward the main salon. Marcus and Aisha peeled toward engineering to disable power if needed. Elias stayed aft, tapping into the yacht's internal feeds through a jack-in to the comm grid. Bond and Naomi paused at a half-open door. Voices floated through. Vale's voice, smooth, almost purring, and another voice distorted through a speaker, low and mechanical. The broker, Naomi mouthed. Bond raised his wrist mic. Elias, patch me in. Elias's calm voice. You're live. Recording. Bond pushed the door a fraction wider. Vale stood at a long table, glass in hand, addressing a holographic projection, grainy, faceless, but commanding. Production lines are secured. Distribution will run through Lagos and Caracas. The drones will reach conflict zones where deniability is assured. Your commission remains intact. The broker's distorted voice replied. Each strike, disciplined, brutal. They carried silenced SMGs, knives strapped to thighs, movements rehearsed in blood. The first assassin lunged for Naomi. She parried with a sharp inside block, twisting his wrist into a joint lock, then drove her knee into his sternum. The man wheezed, but countered with a headbutt that clipped her temple. She staggered, only to slam a heel stomp down on his knee, bone cracking. He collapsed with a guttural cry. Bond engaged 2 at once. A blade flashed. He caught the wrist, redirected, and drove his elbow into the man's throat. The second came from his flank, striking with a baton. Bond slipped under the arc, slammed a boxing cross into his jaw, then finished with a judo throw that sent the man crashing onto a sun lounger, splintering it. Marcus thundered up from engineering, his arms slick with sweat and blood. He tackled one assassin bodily, driving him into the deck rail. They grappled, fists pounding, each strike like a hammer. The assassin slashed with a knife. Marcus caught his wrist, twisted, and rammed the blade into the railing. He headbutted the man twice, savage, until the mask cracked. Naomi returned fire, forcing Vale to retreat behind a steel pillar. The two men circled across the deck, the sea hissing beneath them like a conspirator. Vale was quick, faster than Bond had expected. His shots were precise, controlled bursts. Bond countered, slipping behind cover, then moving closer, step by step. Finally, the distance closed. Vale lunged with a knife, abandoning the pistol. Bond met him blade to blade, their knives sparking in the moonlight. The fight was brutal, intimate. Vale slashed for Bond's throat. Bond parried and countered with a strike to the ribs. Vale elbowed him hard, cracking breath from his lungs. Naomi engaged another assassin nearby, her grunts echoing Bond's own. Bond and Vale struggled at the rail. Vale shoved, trying to force Bond over the edge into the sea. Bond locked his arm, twisted, and delivered a crushing knee strike to Vale's stomach. Vale gasped, but his knife hand swung high. Bond caught it, forced it back, and with a roar of effort, slammed Vale's wrist into the steel rail. The knife clattered to the deck. Bond stood at the rail, breathing the salt air. His shirt was torn, bruises blooming across his ribs, but his eyes were sharp, unyielding. Vale's body lay at his feet, still, blood seeping into the teak planks. One enemy dead. But the broker had seen it all. Naomi wiped a smear of blood from her cheek, reloading her pistol with steady hands. We've made our play. The broker knows our faces now. He'll come for us. Bond nodded, which means we're finally close. Marcus grunted, dragging the last unconscious assassin across the deck. Question is whether we live long enough to use it. Elias's voice rose from below, urgent. We've got a problem. The yacht's systems are fried. Vale set dead man triggers, explosives wired into the engine room. Whoever designed this wanted no survivors. How long? Bond asked. 10 minutes, maybe less. The team moved fast. Aisha led the way down to the lower deck, where the rigid inflatable they had arrived in still floated tied off against the hull. Smoke billowed from vents now, acrid and stinging. Bond slung Vale's encrypted briefcase over. Elias, throttle! Bond shouted. Elias gunned the motor. The inflatable surged, skipping over waves. The speedboat pursued, its engines howling, cutting closer with each second. The Mediterranean became a battlefield of foam and thunder. Bond braced against the side, water spraying his face as bullets hissed past. He fired back, controlled bursts, forcing the attackers to duck. Marcus pulled a compact SMG from under his seat. Time to even the odds. He raked fire across the pursuing craft, rounds hammering its hull. Splinters sprayed, one gunman toppling into the sea with a cry. But the speedboat was heavier, faster. It closed the gap, ramming waves aside. A mounted gun swung toward them, spitting fire. Down, Bond roared. The team ducked as tracers stitched a deadly line overhead. Naomi's eyes narrowed. She pulled a small, palm-sized device from her vest, Q Branch's handiwork. Time to try this. She flicked a switch, tossed it high. The drone-like disc whined to life, streaking toward the speedboat. It latched to the gun mounts with a magnetic click. A moment later, the device detonated. The first page bore the broker's sigil, a lotus flower, inked in crimson, petals spreading like blood. Names filled the ledger: politicians, CEOs, warlords. Payments traced across continents. a map of influence so wide it seemed to choke the world. God, Aisha whispered. He owns everything. Elias scrolled through encrypted drives. And he's watching us, right now. The screen flickered, distorted. A voice filled the hut, low, mechanical, carrying across the cracked speaker. Mr. Bond. Everyone froze. The broker's voice. You kill Vale. You burn his yacht. But you misunderstand. Vale was a branch. Cut one, another grows. You cannot stop the Lotus. You cannot stop me. Bond's jaw clenched. We've stopped you before. The voice chuckled, a sound without humanity. Not this time. This time, I have your team in my sights. The feed died. A beat later, the world exploded. The hut's windows shattered inward. Bullets tore through the walls. Explosives thumped against the stone. Smoke flooded the interior. Bond shouted above the chaos, "Fall back, to the cliffs." They burst into the open air, the Sicilian dawn bleeding red across the sea. The cliffs rose jagged, treacherous. Below, waves thundered against stone. Lotus assassins swarmed after them, black figures against the pale light. Gunfire cracked, echoing across the rock. Bond ducked behind an outcropping, firing precise shots. Aisha vaulted a boulder, rolling midair, coming up with her blade buried in an assassin's spine. Marcus roared, tackling another straight off the cliff, both men tumbling into the waves below. Naomi spun, catching a flying kick aimed at her chest. She countered with a low sweep, dropping her opponent hard. She finished with a reverse elbow strike that shattered the assassin's nose. But more came. Too many. Elias shouted behind a rock. "Bond, incoming drone strike. He's targeting the whole ridge." Bond looked up. Against the dawn, black shapes swarmed, drones, sleek and humming, carrying payloads. The broker's hand had reached them here. Bond's teeth bared. "Move, now!" They ran. A small micro-drone, no larger than a dragonfly, sat inside his watch casing. With a subtle command into his earpiece, the drone unfolded its wings and buzzed into the night. Through its camera feed, Bond scanned the district around Rafiq's residence, a dingy apartment block overlooking a spice market. The building was too quiet, the alleyways too empty. Someone had paid to keep neighbors away tonight. Bond murmured, "Too careful for a courier. He's expecting company." Q's voice crackled softly in his ear, calm as always. "Indeed, that microdrone is giving me thermal readings. He's not alone. 2 men on the second floor, one armed with a compact rifle, the other pacing near the window. Looks like private muscle." Bond's lips curved into a grim smile. "Then let's not keep them waiting." He moved swiftly through the back streets, his footsteps silent against cobblestones, slick with rain. Every corner, every shadow could hide eyes, but Bond moved with the precision of a predator. At the rear of the apartment block, he withdrew a small gas capsule, non-lethal but efficient, designed. Rafiq woke tied to an iron chair, wrists locked, sweat dripping down his forehead as a single hanging bulb swung above him. The silence of the bathhouse was oppressive, broken only by the drip of water echoing through the chambers. Bond leaned against a pillar, his posture calm but his eyes sharp. "You've been very busy, Rafiq. Geneva, Cairo, Moscow, always carrying things that don't belong to you." Rafiq swallowed hard, panic flaring in his eyes. You're British intelligence." Bond stepped forward, his shadow falling over the trembling courier. His voice was low, deliberate. "You know what Black Lotus is. Tell me who's behind it." Rafik shook his head violently. "No, no, they'll kill me." Bond's patience thinned. He crouched, staring directly into the man's eyes. "You're already dead to them. To me, you're still useful. You have one chance." Rafik trembled, but said nothing. Bond straightened and removed his jacket. His movements were
French accent, scar down his left cheek. He's the one who contacts me. He operates from a villa north of Athens. That's all I know, I swear. Bond's gaze didn't soften. He studied the courier for any sign of deceit. But the terror was real, the confession genuine. He cut the bonds with a flick of his knife, letting Rafik slump forward. "You won't be killed unless you try to run. Stay quiet, and maybe you'll live long enough to regret your choices." As Bond dragged Rafik toward the Aston Martin outside, a faint crunch of gravel reached his ears. Instantly, his instincts sharpened. Someone was here. The first gunshot echoed through the bathhouse archways, stone ships spraying from the wall inches from Bond's head. He shoved Rafik down behind the column and rolled into cover. 4 men advanced through the shadows, armed and precise. Silence returned, broken only by the hiss of Bond's breathing. Bond pulled Rafik to his feet, his tone flat. "You see, Rafik, this is what loyalty buys you. Corpses." Rafik was pale, trembling. "You'll never reach Varen. He's not just a man. He's protected. There are forces backing him you don't understand." Bond shoved him into the Aston Martin's back seat. "Then it's a good thing I don't need to understand. I just need to stop him." As the car roared into the Istanbul night, Bond's mind raced. Athens was the next step. But he could feel it. The web of Operation Black Lotus was larger, darker, more dangerous than anything MI6 had yet uncovered. And James Bond was already deep inside its shadows. The rain had just begun to fall when James Bond stepped out of Heathrow's secure terminal and into the waiting Aston Martin that MI6 had dispatched. London, his city, never welcomed him with warmth. It had a way of reminding him that duty came before rest. His muscles still ached from the brutal cliffside fight in Greece. Her eyes flicked briefly to Bond, a mix of relief and concern. Satellite intercepts picked up chatter across 3 continents, smuggling routes, coded shipments. He's shifting assets at a scale we haven't seen before. Bond took the folder, scanning quickly. Every page showed coded ledgers, shipping manifests, transfers routed through ghost companies. But one detail made him pause. Athens, Palermo, Marseille. The broker's footprint was spreading like wildfire. Q entered last, balancing a tablet and an overstuffed briefcase. "Before you get yourself killed again, 007, I'd appreciate you at least trying some of the toys I've built for you." Bond gave him a faint smile. "Always a pleasure to be your test subject, Q." Q laid out the briefcase on M's table, snapping it open with theatrical precision. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a sleek black wristwatch with a faint iridescent glow on its bezel. "Modified Omega," Q explained. "To the untrained eye, just another Bond trinket. To you, a lifeline. It's equipped with a microsonic emitter, capable of disorienting opponents at close range without leaving a trace. Don't abuse it. Prolonged use will rupture eardrums." Q simply muttered, "Do try not to destroy everything this time." Bond pocketed the watch and pen, then looked back at M. "And if I find the broker?" M's eyes met his. "Bring him in alive, if you can. But if not—" Bond didn't wait for him to finish. He already knew the answer. Outside, the rain lashed harder against the glass. London was weeping, but Bond felt nothing. His war wasn't here. It was waiting for him on the sun-bleached shores of Sicily, where shadows grew longer and enemies grew bolder. And this time, he wasn't chasing the broker alone. The Mediterranean sun burned bright as the Mi-6 transport jet banked over Sicily, its wings cutting a silver line against the azure sky. Below, the sprawl of Palermo gleamed, a city of contradictions, where Baroque cathedrals stood beside crumbling alleyways and centuries of empire had left their scars on stone and people alike. Bond stood at the window, his gaze fixed on the docks that stretched into the sea like skeletal fingers. Somewhere within those warehouses, the broker was running his empire under the guise of global trade. Weapons. "Broker's nest," Bond said. "We go in quiet." Reyes grunted, checking the blade strapped to his wrist. Rosie, meanwhile, was scanning the perimeter, her dark hair pulled back, her Italian accent sharper than usual. "Locals whisper about this place. They call it La Casa di Vetro, the House of Glass. Nobody who's taken inside comes out." Bond's reply was cold. "Then we'll shatter it." Midnight cloaked the team as they moved along the seawall, dressed in black tactical gear. Bond led, his movements precise, like a shadow among shadows. The smell of salt water mixed with oil and rust as they neared the warehouse. A sentry rounded the corner, cigarette dangling from his lips. He never saw Reyes until it was too late. The command twisting sharply until bones cracked. A kote gaishi, wrist lock straight out of Aikido. The weapon clattered away. The second attacker swung the pipe, but Bond ducked, rolling low. He sprang upward with a rising side kick, the heel smashing under the man's chin. Blood sprayed as he collapsed backward. From the lower floor, Reyes and Daniels had run into their own skirmish. Bond caught glimpses of knives flashing, Daniels grappling one opponent into a choke, Reyes slamming another through a crate. Rossi's pistol barked twice, dropping a guard who had slipped behind them. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the alarm wailed. Floodlights blazed to life. Sirens echoed across the port. Dozens of armed men poured into the warehouse from every door, rifles raised. Bond cursed under his breath. Subtlety was gone. "Fall back to the Willa," Daniel shouted. "No," Bond snapped. "We finish what we started." He sprinted up the stairwell, bullets sparking off steel, until he reached the reinforced room. Every shadow felt alive, every echo amplified. Beside him, Nisha adjusted her suppressed MP7. Her eyes met his, a flicker of readiness. Behind them, Keller moved with silent precision, while Rami, the youngest of the team, scanned their flank. 4 predators in enemy territory, but the broker had anticipated them. A faint click echoed from deeper in the maze. Bond's instincts screamed, "Down!" he hissed. A flash mine erupted, light flooding the aisles, followed by a rain of metallic clattering. Drones, small, beetle-like with twin spinning blades, buzzed to life, crimson eyes blinking. Their sound was a swarm's fury amplified by steel. Nisha cursed under her breath. "They've automated the damned place!" Bond fired once, shattering a drone mid-air, sparks cascading like fireflies, but the swarm descended. Keller swung his rifle like a bat, smashing one into a crate. Rami dropped, rolling beneath another, his dagger flashing as he sliced its wiring. Bond barked, "Stay moving, they're hurting us." Sure enough, the drones weren't designed to kill, only to drive.
The attacker unleashed a series of Wing Chun-style chain punches, blistering fast. Bond parried with forearms, absorbing the shock, his stance rooted like stone. Then he broke rhythm, stepped inside the punches, forehead smashing into the man's nose with a sickening crack. Blood sprayed. One down. On the other side, Keller fought like a tank. A bruiser of a man, his style was more Krav Maga, efficient, bone-breaking. One assailant tried a high roundhouse. Keller caught the leg midair, twisted, and slammed the man onto the concrete like a rag doll. Another rushed with the knife. Keller stepped inside, headbutt first, then wrenched the blade away and buried it into the attacker's thigh. Nisha's movements were art in motion. She dodged and struck with capoeira-like spins, her kicks flowing in arcs that cut through multiple opponents. A man grabbed her wrist. She used the leverage to flip herself over him, twisting midair and landing behind him with her pistol pressed to his skull. Click. Empty chamber. She smirked, drove her knee into his spine, and discarded him. Rami, using the man's momentum to smash him shoulder first into a steel crate. But Red Mask rolled up like liquid, unfazed. He smirked beneath the mask and beckoned. Again. Bond obliged. They collided, Bond's fists crashing into forearms, knees into ribs, every move met with brutal precision, a dance of violence in perfect rhythm. Finally, Bond faked a straight punch, then dropped low, spinning into a sweeping crescent kick that scythed across Red Mask's legs. The man toppled. Bond followed through, pinning him with a knee to the chest, P99 leveled between the crimson eyes. "Where's the director?" Bond growled. The man laughed, a rasping, broken sound. "Already watching you." A voice boomed across the warehouse, rich with menace, distorted through hidden speakers. "Well done, Mr. Bond. You've broken my toys, bruised my pets, but you've walked exactly where I wanted." The lights flickered, then steadied. At the far end of the bay, a balcony loomed. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in black, face hidden behind a mask of silver porcelain, carved with a faint smile. The shutters locked into place with a metallic finality. The warehouse air thickened, like a sealed tomb. Above them, the phantom director leaned casually on the railing, silver mask gleaming under the harsh lights. Bond lowered his pistol, realizing the truth. Too many targets, ammunition finite. This wasn't a gunfight anymore. It was an arena. The director spread his arms, voice curling with theatrical menace. "Ladies and gentlemen, the curtain rises." A horn blared, and the fighters surged. The first wave struck like a tide, 12 men at once, each trained in a different martial discipline. Bond dropped his empty mag, holstered the pistol, and slid into stance. The first came with the Muay Thai knee strike, straight for his ribs. Bond intercepted with the forearm block, twisted, and slammed his palm into the attacker's jaw. Bone crunched. Another leapt with a spinning back kick. Bond ducked, the heel whipping over his skull. He responded with a sharp sidekick to the solar plexus, driving the man back into two others. Then came the dual assault. Nisha was poetry in violence. Two men circled her, one brandishing twin batons.
He swung, she bent low, legs spinning in a capoeira rabo de araya kick, heel connecting with his chin in a perfect arc. The second swung wild. She caught his wrist midair, twisted, and flipped herself onto his back. In one fluid motion, she wrapped her legs around his throat, triangle choke, and used his collapsing body to flip over onto her feet again. A third enemy rushed her with a steel pipe. She ducked under the first swing, grabbed his wrist, and disarmed him with a twist. Then she kept the momentum, swinging the pipe across his knees. He collapsed, screaming. Next, she hissed, eyes aflame. Rami fought like desperation made flesh. He had no polish, just survival. One enemy grabbed him in a choke from behind. Instead of panicking, Rami stomped his boot backward, crushing toes. His elbow drove into ribs, then his head snapped backward into the man's nose. The grip loosened. Rami twisted free, spinning, and clawed at the eyes. 2 clean strikes later, one across the arm, another across the chest, the fighters collapsed, screaming. Bond exhaled, chest heaving. Sweat dripped down his brow, mixing with blood that wasn't his own. Above them, the phantom director clapped slowly. The sound was theatrical, mocking. "Marvelous, Mr. Bond. You bleed, yet you dance. You suffer, yet you improvise. This is why I chose you. This is why you fascinate me." Bond snarled. "You'll find me less fascinating when I put a bullet through that mask." The phantom tilted his head. "Perhaps. But first, let us peel away your allies. A story must have tragedy, after all." He raised a hand. From the far shutter, a second wave emerged, larger, heavier, armored enforcers. Each carried electrified batons that crackled with menace. One lunged at Keller. The baton cracked against his forearm, sending electricity searing through muscle. He gritted his teeth, refusing to drop. With a guttural roar, he slammed his forehead into the enforcer's nose. Finally, the phantom director raised his hand again. Silence! The fighters froze mid-motion and retreated, melting back into shadows. Bond wiped blood from his split lip, chest heaving, eyes locked on the silver mask above. The director leaned forward, voice low and cold. "Enough spectacle. Now, Mr. Bond, you face me." The balcony gate opened. Stairs descended like a stage prop. The phantom director stepped down slowly, his movements deliberate, like a maestro approaching center stage. His cloak brushed the ground, porcelain mask gleaming. Nisha whispered, "God, it's him." Bond adjusted his stance, body aching, fists clenched. Finally, the true confrontation. The director reached the floor, only a few meters away. He removed his cloak, revealing a sleek combat suit beneath. Plates of lightweight carbon fiber hugged his chest and shoulders. Joints were reinforced with flexible armor that moved like second skin. And his face, hidden behind a smooth, featureless mask of black obsidian, radiated menace. He moved into the circle, slow and deliberate. "Mr. Bond." The voice came through a modulator, deeper now, like iron scraping against stone. "Every symphony requires a finale. Tonight, you play your last note." Bond rolled his shoulders, ignoring the pain stabbing through his ribs. His voice was steady, dry. "Let's see if your mask still smiles when I break it." The phantom launched first, no hesitation. A blinding straight-line strike, fist like a piston, snapping for Bond's throat. Bond swayed, an inch back. The fist missed by a whisper. Phantom flowed instantly into a low, sweeping kick. Bond leapt, twisting midair, landing light, only to meet a reverse spinning elbow aimed at his temple. The crack of impact rang as Bond barely deflected it with his forearm.
Pain flared up his arm like fire. The Phantom pressed, his movements flawless, seamless. His strikes blended Aikido throws, Salat elbows, Krav Maga knee thrusts, each chained together without pause. Every attack driving him back into a stack of steel drums. Metal thundered as both crashed down. Bond rained punches, 1, 2, 3 to the ribs. Each strike solid, but Phantom snapped his head forward, smashing his mask into Bond's nose with brutal force. Bond reeled back, blood spraying. Before he could recover, Phantom twisted around, snaring Bond's arm into a Kimura lock. Pressure seared Bond's shoulder, threatening to snap it. Bond roared, rolling into the pain, flipping himself sideways. They tumbled across the floor, Bond slamming an elbow into Phantom's side until the grip broke. Both rose again, circling, panting, predators measuring distance. The fight spilled upward. Phantom fainted, then bounded for the steel scaffolding lining the warehouse walls. Bond chased. Boots clanged on iron. They rose higher, 20 feet above the floor, surrounded by shadows and flickering light. Here, the Phantom grew faster, acrobatic. He used the bars like extensions of his body, swinging around beams, launching aerial strikes. Bond barely avoided a flying sidekick that would have shattered his sternum. He countered by grabbing Phantom aiming for the kill, a straight thrust punch to the chest. Bond twisted at the last second, like a bowstring snapping, his body angled 90 degrees. Phantom's fist grazed past. Bond answered with a spinning elbow into the mask, the crack echoing across the chamber. A fracture spiderwebbed across the obsidian surface. For the first time, Phantom staggered. Bond pressed, unleashing a barrage. Jab, cross, knee strike, hook. Phantom blocked most, but not all. Blood seeped through the mask's fracture. "You bleed," Bond growled. Phantom only chuckled darkly. Then he surged back, faster, angrier. The Phantom shifted styles again, flowing into fluid, whip-fast strikes, Silat joint locks, Wing Chun rapid punches, Jeet Kune Do feints. Bond blocked, dodged, absorbed, but fatigue gnawed at him. Every parry was slower, every counter weaker. Phantom exploited it. He faked high, then snapped a brutal low kick to the thigh. Bond's leg buckled. Phantom caught him in a chokehold, arm clamping like steel around his throat. Bond clawed at the arm, gasping, vision darkening. Bond met him head on. He slipped the punch, pivoted, and drove his elbow back. Perfect angle, perfect force. The strike shattered the mask completely. The Phantom fell to his knees, blood streaming down his face. Silence roared in the warehouse. Bond stood over him, chest heaving, body wrecked. The Phantom director laughed weakly, blood bubbling from his lips. "You think this ends me? You think you've won?" Bond raised the fist, ready to end it. Then, the warehouse trembled. A deep rumble shook the floor. From the shadows, steel shutters began to rise again. Dozens, no, hundreds of reinforcements, armored and armed, pouring in. The Phantom director, broken but grinning through blood, whispered, "This was never the end, Bond, only the overture." Bond turned, sweat and blood dripping, eyes narrowing as the army closed in. The duel had ended. The war had just begun. The abandoned refinery at Raven's Hollow burned like the gates of hell. Flames licked. He looked up. One of the director's assassins crouched like a spider on the beam. The man leaped, knife flashing. Bond sidestepped, using the assassin's momentum.
His left arm hooked the man's wrist mid-swing, snapping it sideways in a kotegaeshi wristlock. The blade clattered away. Before the man could recover, Bond pivoted, driving his knee upward in a brutal Muay Thai strike into the ribs. The sickening crack of cartilage echoed. The assassin collapsed, choking. Bond didn't wait. He twisted sharply, snapping the man's neck with clinical precision. He looked up. More shadows moved along the catwalks. They had seen. They were closing in. Bond ducked behind a row of oil drums, motioning Nia and Tanner closer. "They want to box us in," Bond whispered. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp steel. "We give them a choke point, make them bleed for every step." From his belt, he pulled 2 smoke capsules, non-lethal but disorienting. He tossed them into the narrow passage leading into their section of the refinery. Shouts, footsteps scrambling across steel, then silence. From the smoke, a slow clap echoed. The phantom director emerged, bloodied, one arm bound with a torn sleeve, but his posture regal, his eyes cold and merciless, locked on Bond. "You've proven irritating, Mr. Bond, but this ends tonight." Bond raised his pistol. The director smirked and raised his hand. Dozens of red dots danced across Bond's chest. Snipers, hidden in the smoke and the rafters. Bond lowered the gun, jaw tight. The director limped forward, flanked by 2 guards in tactical armor. "I should kill you here," the director said, voice low, venomous. "But I want you to feel something first. Helplessness." Bond's eyes narrowed. "You'll need more than theatrics to break me." The guards charged. Bond threw himself into them with brutal efficiency. The first swung with a baton. Bond parried, catching the strike on his forearm, then twisted, locking the guard's elbow before driving a reverse roundhouse kick. Blood sprayed. Another lunged with a sword. Bond sidestepped, trapping the blade under his arm. He wrenched it free, flipped the sword, and slashed clean across the man's thigh. An assassin tried a high kick. Bond ducked under it, grabbed the man's ankle mid-air, and twisted sharply in a leg-lock takedown. The snap of bone echoed like a gunshot. He rolled back to his feet, sword in hand, chain wrapped across the other. He moved like a predator, cutting through the attackers with ruthless precision. At last, the wave broke. The refinery floor was littered with bodies, groans echoing through the smoke. The phantom director, however, had retreated deeper into the shadows, his voice echoing over the fire and chaos. "You've bled my men, Bond, but I have armies. And when the Black Lotus blooms, the world will burn." His laughter faded as he disappeared into the maze of the refinery. Bond stood over the carnage, chest heaving, eyes blazing. He dropped the blood-slicked sword with a clatter. "This isn't over," he whispered, before turning to his battered allies. It was only beginning. He shoved Nia down just as a tripwire snapped. A row of concealed charges detonated along the far wall, blasting shrapnel across the corridor. The concussion knocked them sprawling, Tanner cursing as sparks rained. Bond rolled to his feet. He's turned this place into a labyrinth of death. From the smoke, 3 masked assassins advanced, their blades glinting. These weren't foot soldiers. Their stance, their balance, they were elite. The first struck fast, slashing high. Bond deflected with his forearm, twisting the blade away while driving a sharp front kick into the man's chest. The impact slammed him against the wall. The second came low, stabbing for Bond's thigh. Bond pivoted, catching the wrist and yanking it upward into a kansetsu waza arm break. The assassin shrieked as bones snapped. The third leapt from a pipe overhead, legs scissoring toward Bond's neck. Bond ducked under, spinning as the attacker landed.
He launched a brutal spinning back fist, smashing the man across the jaw. But these killers didn't die easy. All three staggered back up, once shoving Tanner aside, just as a concealed turret tore the corridor apart. Finally, they emerged into a vast processing chamber. Rusted machinery loomed, catwalks crisscrossing overhead. At the far end, through the haze, Bond spotted him. The Phantom Director, limping but defiant, flanked by two armored bodyguards. Their eyes locked. The Director smirked and ran. The bodyguards advanced, blocking pursuit. Massive, muscular, clad in reinforced armor. Bond felt the weight of their presence immediately. The first swung with a massive steel baton. Bond ducked, narrowly avoiding the crushing blow. He countered with a swift, low sweep, aiming to break balance, but the guard barely shifted. The second came in with a heavy punch. Bond caught the arm, twisting into a standing Kimura lock, but the armor resisted. Pain shot through Bond's wrist as he was forced to release. These weren't just brutes. They were trained. The fight raged across the chamber floor. Bond moved like a storm, flying knee, back elbow, spinning heel kick, each strike precise, powerful. But the guards absorbed. Screens flickered, showing global feeds, financial streams, encrypted networks. And there, at the center, stood the Phantom Director. His once immaculate suit was torn, his face bloodied, but his aura radiated control. In his hand, a detonator blinked red. "You've cut through my men," he said softly, his voice like venom. "But I don't need them. One press, and this entire place becomes your tomb." Bond raised his pistol. His finger hovered on the trigger. But the Director's other hand held something worse, a data core, glowing faintly. The Black Lotus files. "Kill me, and the world burns anyway," the Director whispered. "You've lost, Mr. Bond." The chamber vibrated. Alarms wailed. One wrong move and the entire chamber would become their grave. Bond's jaw tightened. He lowered the gun and let it clatter to the steel floor. The Director smiled. "Good. You understand inevitability." He pocketed the data core, then tossed the detonator onto a console where it blinked menacingly. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his jacket, letting it fall. Underneath, his body was lean, corded with muscle, scars etching his skin. "You think I built an empire by hiding behind men with guns?" he sneered. "No, Bond. I carved my place with these hands." He raised his fists. Bond rolled his shoulders, muscles coiling. "Then let's see what they're worth." The Director struck first, a sudden, brutal straight jab. Bond slipped aside, countering with a crisp cross to the ribs. The Director barely flinched. He followed with a roundhouse kick, arcing high. Bond blocked with his forearm, absorbing the shock. Pain jolted through bone. The Director was fast, trained. Every move carried precision born from decades of discipline. This was no ordinary villain. This was a fighter. Bond slammed the Director into a console, sparks flying. He drove a series of body shots, ribs crunching under his fists. The Director retaliated with a knife-hand chop to Bond's throat, forcing him back, choking. The Director grabbed a loose steel rod, swinging with lethal arcs. Bond ducked one, rolled under the second, and wrenched it free. They grappled, steel rod between them, each trying to force it into the other's throat. Muscles trembled. Bond twisted sharply, jamming his elbow into the Director's ribs. The rod clattered away. Back to fists. The Director caught Bond with a brutal sidekick, slamming him against the railing. Bond gasped, clutching his ribs. The Director advanced, fists raised.
But Bond was never out. He lunged forward, unleashing a lightning-fast double strike. Elbow to the gut, followed by a savage hook to the jaw. The director stumbled. Sweat and blood mingled. Both men were battered, breathing ragged. Bond's mind sharpened. He recalled every technique, every hour on the mats, every killer-be-killed lesson. This wasn't just survival. This was justice. The director charged with a roar, launching into a flying sidekick. The detonator blinked inches away. With his last strength, the Phantom reached for it. Bond grabbed his wrist, wrenching it upward, and with a cold, final motion, snapped it. The detonator clattered harmlessly. The Phantom gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. Bond leaned close, voice steel. The only thing blooming tonight is your end. One final strike, a crushing palm heel to the skull. The Phantom director went still. Bond staggered back, chest heaving. The chamber crackled with dying sparks. Behind him, Naya and Tanner stared, wide-eyed. The detonator lay silent. The data core glowed faintly on the console. Bond picked it up, tucking it into his belt. "It's over," he said quietly. But in his eyes, the fire still burned. Because men like the Phantom were never truly alone. Black Lotus had roots deeper than one man. For tonight, though, the world still belonged to the living. The storm was over. Or so it seemed. The Black Lotus facility smoldered in the jungle's belly, spectacles low on his nose as he read the final debrief. Tanner, arm still bandaged, stood stiff-backs nearby. "So," M said, voice measured, "the Phantom director is confirmed dead. The Black Lotus data core in our possession, and the detonation protocol neutralized." Bond nodded once. All true. M removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I've read your report twice, 007. It's thorough. But tell me, what isn't on the page?" Bond's eyes flickered. "That it won't end here. Black Lotus is an organism. Cut one head, another rises. We've delayed the inevitable. Nothing more." M exhaled, long and weary. "And yet, for the moment, London sleeps safe. That will do." There was silence. Rain whispered against the glass. "Good work, Bond," M said. It was not praise. M never wasted words on that. It was acknowledgement. Bond inclined his head slightly, understanding the weight behind it. Later, Bond found himself in a shadowed corner of a Mayfair hotel bar. Bond's Aston Martin purred through the gates of Q Branch the next morning. Inside, the cavernous lab buzzed with activity, engineers tinkering with gadgets, mechanics fussing over armored vehicles. Q himself appeared, fussing with a tablet, his bow tie slightly askew. He gave Bond a pointed look. "You nearly fried half the Pacific grid, 007, and you brought me a data core so unstable it's a miracle it hasn't vaporized half of London." Bond smirked faintly. "You'll manage. You always do." Q rolled his eyes. "Honestly, you treat my department like a miracle factory, but—" His tone softened, almost grudging. "Well done, Bond. I doubt anyone else could have pulled it off." He gestured to a nearby workbench. "While you were off saving civilization, I made some upgrades. Consider it an apology for the last batch of exploding pens." Bond arched an eyebrow. "What is it this time?" Q tapped the sleek case. "A field watch. Reinforced casing, EMP resistant,
with micro-drone deployment. Just don't. But he smiled faintly, the kind of smile only men who lived on the edge could muster. When it does end, sir, Bond said, it won't be them who decides it. They clinked glasses. That night, Bond stood at the window of his flat in Chelsea. The city stretched out before him, a tapestry of lights and rain. Somewhere below, laughter spilled from a pub. London lived, oblivious to the battles fought in its name. Bond lit a cigarette, inhaling deeply. The smoke curled upward, ephemeral, vanishing into the dark. He thought of the Phantom's last words, "The Black Lotus will bloom." And he thought of the file on N's desk, the Ashen Circle. The war was never over. Behind him, the phone rang. Bond let it ring twice before answering.